everyone. Welcome to this Roundup. The COVID-19 outbreak reminds us of the fragility of some of our most basic human-made systems. Since we witnessed the cascading collapse of entire food, manufacturing, production, and transportation systems, it forces us to evaluate the fundamentals on which we build systems to understand where the vulnerabilities are and what needs to be addressed. To discuss the lessons from COVID-19, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Moshe Vardi to this roundup. Moshe Vardi is a university professor and the George Distinguished Service Professor in Computational Engineering and Director of the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology at Rice University. He's the author and co-author of over 650 papers, as well as 2 books. Congratulations. He is the recipient of several scientific awards. He is a fellow of several societies and a member of several honorary academies. He holds 7 honorary doctorates. He is a senior editor of Communications of the ACM, the premier publication in computing, focusing on societal impact of information technology. Welcome, Professor Vardi. We are so very honored to have you on this roundup.
It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Wonderful, Professor. So, before you begin the presentation, let me ask you this. While systems at all levels are struggling to absorb the shock generated by the ongoing pandemic, it is important to evaluate the core concept on which we have built the systems and on which they operate. What did the shock of COVID-19 teach us so far in how we build the systems over the years? And I believe you have a presentation, so let's go ahead and see your presentation.
So, sometimes simple questions do not have simple answers. But I do believe in this case, there is a simple answer. And this is the dichotomy between efficiency and resilience. In the presentation, I will try to give an exposition, and I will use a few fields, but in particular, one which is my field, computer science, and the other one is also economic, which is the world we all live in. And there is no question that we live in a crisis, but it's important to understand it's not a single crisis. It's a confluence of several crises coming together. Underlying the whole thing is a COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, we are looking at the dashboard, these dashboards every day. They were just in the news this morning. We have reached 200,000 deaths in the United States. It is shocking that we are not shocked anymore by this, that we have almost gotten used to the 50,000 and then 100,000 and now 200,000. Unquestionably, we all realize that this has caused a depression class economic crisis. This is not the parking lot in Disneyland. This is a line, people waiting for a food bank somewhere, I think in Los Angeles, to get food, waiting for hours in the car to get food, because many people they lost their job, they don't have enough income to buy food. Energy crisis, oil prices are way, way down. Now that may sound like good news, but one for Texas, it's very bad news economically. But for all of us, if oil prices are down, then the incentive to deal with the climate crisis diminishes. And I'll come back because I'll talk the climate crisis near the very end. And at the same time, we live in a social crisis. Deep inequities in American society that have been with us for a long time has been exposed, and we had heightened sensitivity and not willing to take certain things anymore. And at the same time, we are in a political crisis. The death of the notorious RBG takes whatever was going to be a stormy election period to a whole new level. Now let's go back to March, which seems like 10 years ago. In March, the buzzword was flattening the curve. And you could see in March, if you can see picture that show like this, and the purple would be the normal course of an epidemic. And at some point, the epidemic slowed down because the virus ran out of new hosts. Enough people die and get immune. So all pandemics proceed in a Gaussian shape. And the argument was we need to flatten the curve. It wasn't even necessarily about having fewer cases, but we need to have a flatter. And why does it have to be flatter? so the hospital will not be overwhelmed. This is the argument was. Our hospital were overwhelmed. You may remember what happened in Italy early in the spring, what happened later in New York, hospital were overwhelmed. Here's an article from April 2020, MarketWatch. Nurses are wearing garbage bags as they battle coronavirus because there was shortage of PPEs, personal protective equipment. It's like something out of the Twilight Zone. And this sense that suddenly the systems were, all the systems were not ready. The systems were just not ready, which is what you mentioned, Jayashree, at the beginning, motivated, inspired William Galston, who's an economist at the Brookings Institute, to write a column on March of this year in the Wall Street Journal. And he wrote, efficiency is not the only economic virtue. And he asked, what if the relentless pursuit of efficiency, which has dominated American business thinking for decades, has made the global economic system more vulnerable to shocks? What is resilience? Resilience is ability to recover from illness, depression, adversity, and the like. And he explained, efficiency comes to the optimal adaptation to an existing environment, while resilience requires the capacity to adapt to disruptive changes in the environment. And he's not the only one that raised this point. This point was raised by different people in different expressed somewhat differently. Here's Tom Friedman from May 30th of this year in the New York Times. And you have to remember, Tom Friedman was the high prophet of globalization. And he wrote, greed and globalization set us up for disaster. Over the past 20 years, he wrote, we've been steadily removing main man and natural buffer, redundancy, regulation, and norms that provide resilience and protection when big system, be they ecological, geopolitical, or financial, get stressed. We've been recklessly removing this buffer out of an obsession with a short-term efficiency and growth, or without thinking at all. So this point about efficiency, it turns out it's not a new point. It has been said in 1975. That's the earliest reference that I found for it, an article by Amy Goldberg in Environment and Planning. And the title is beautiful, on the inefficiency of being efficient. And his main point was that if you focus only on efficiency, then you have a very, very narrow lens in which you're looking at the problem. And if you're looking at the problem through a narrow lens, you're going to consider a very narrow range of possible solutions. And he said, we have been just too narrow-mindedly focusing on efficiency. We have to think in a wider way. So I'll give an example, which is just-in-time manufacturing, JIT, just-in-time manufacturing. I remember when this was a hot thing in logistics, just-in-time manufacturing. So the idea was, it probably goes back, I think, 80s and 90s, it was especially hot, was that keeping inventory is very expensive. First of all, you buy the parts, that's money invested, that money is not productive money. It just the parts sit idle in a warehouse. You need a warehouse, this is space. You need to maintain the warehouse. All of this costs a lot of money, in the inventory just sitting there. If we could be more efficient and the parts will arrive just in time for manufacturing, we will basically be able to keep almost zero inventory, and it will be much more efficient. Now, of course, this assumes best case logistics. Everything does arrive on time. There are no disruptions. So you can see why this comes at the expense. It's very efficient, but it comes at the expense of resilience. And the Wall Street Journal has been running a sequence of articles called the COVID storm, and partly try to ask what has been happening with the economy. Why did we fail so badly? And you remember when you couldn't get paper towel, you couldn't get toilet paper. Why? And again, article in the Wall Street Journal from August, blame lean manufacturing. Lean manufacturing is the same thing as just-in-time manufacturing. A decades-long effort to eke out more profit by keeping inventory low left many manufacturers unprepared when COVID-19 struck, and production is unlikely to ramp up significantly anytime soon. The infrastructure for keeping warehouses and parts and all of this just doesn't exist anymore. And the same thing happened in hospitals. Why did COVID overwhelm hospital? The answer is a years-long drive for efficiency. Health systems have kept a tight rein on employee numbers and expanded outpatient care, helping their finances by making them less prepared for a medical crisis. We focus so much on efficiency, we neglected resilience. And you can find it in other areas of our economy. For example, I went back and dug an article from 2009. It was called The Formula That Killed Wall Street. And you ask, why did the economy almost collapse in 2008? After all, Wall Street does risk management. They're in the business of risk management. And the answer was, they call it the formula that killed Wall Street. The formula was called value at risk, which is you try to understand, you want to know with 99%, I will not lose more than $100 million, and I can absorb $100 million loss, let's say. So they have fancy formulas, very fancy mathematics. But there now, this fancy mathematics works well for normal times. And it did not work well for a crisis. So suddenly, they had all the mathematical model broke down. It was a black swan event. All the mathematical model broke down, and they had no guidance. So they optimized operations for normal times and did not plan what will happen if we have a real crisis. And so when the crisis happened, Wall Street really was not ready. And you can think about this tension between efficient and resilience in other areas as well. What about governance? Let's quote Winston Churchill, 1947. Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms have been tried from time to time. So democracy, we know democracy is very inefficient. All we have to look at Washington right now. But generally speaking, it is more resilient because more branches, more parties are involved in decision making. So it's a buffer to dictatorship can make very efficient decision, but one person can make a mistake. Stalin was warned about the Germany was going to attack in June of 1941, but he did not believe the warning. Hitler would not betray him, he said. And the Soviet Union was almost destroyed. It's an interesting question to debate now. How does democracy handle pandemics? So United States did pretty badly in pandemics. On the other hand, federalism was a source of a problem, but it also enabled certain states to do better than other states. So I think we will be discussing it for a long time. And I want to go back to the economic crisis because I think it is related to that. So remember, we saw hundreds of cars, thousands of cars waiting for food banks. This was foreseen. This was not unexpected. In 2016, there were several articles that talk about the precarity of the American working class and middle class. Atlantic Monthly, May 2016. Nearly half of Americans would have trouble finding $400 to pay for an emergency. If your brakes break down, it costs $400 to fix them. 47% of Americans did not have a spare $400 to fix their transmission. If you went to $1,000, I'm sorry, your brakes, but if your transmission goes back, which is $1,000, 2/3 of Americans would have trouble paying for this. So in June of this year, Adam Serwer wrote the Atlantic, it did not have to be like this. The desperation of US workers in the aftermath of the coronavirus was the product of a series of policy decisions and missed opportunities. We created an economy where 2/3 of the people are living on the edge. And I want to give you one example from how does nature deal with this tension between efficiency and resilience. I'm an editor of this publication, Communication of the ACM. ACM stands for Association of Computer Machinery. ACM is the premier professional society in computing, and Communication is their flagship publication. And in 2016, we published an article, Sex as an Algorithm. Now this was it's a serious scholarly article. It looks at sex from an evolutionary point of view, but through the lens of computation. And I think there's a lot of insight we can learn from nature. And the question that Livnat and Papadimitriou asked in 2016 was, We know that if you look computational, people have tried to mimic nature in algorithms. So we have algorithms that are based on mutations, and this is called simulated annealing. There's an algorithm also based on mutation plus a computational simulation of sexual reproduction by crossbreeding two chromosomes. We know that the search based on just mutation is more efficient. It's a better search than based on combination of mutation and sexual reproduction. So why does nature choose an algorithm which we have shown is not as good as mutation? Why do the vast majority of animals use sex for reproduction? And they offer an amazing answer. And the answer is, it's not about efficiency and optimality. What sexual reproduction does, it generates greater genetic diversity of the population of the species. So each individual is less optimally adapted to the environment. But the species has enough genetic diversity that there is a sudden dramatic change in the environment, the species will survive. Individuals may not, but the species will survive. And so this is, so sexual reproduction is more resilient than production with asexual reproduction. Now you can think of both efficiency and resilience as two facets of optimization. Efficiency, you can think of short-term optimization. I want to make the expectation, analyst expectation for the next quarter. Resilience is about long-term. How do I survive an unforeseen crisis? Well, nature had billions of years to figure out which one is better. And in the long term, resilience is better because it's about survival. So the T-Rex was incredibly efficient hunting machines. If you've seen the movie, you do not want to have to run away from a T-Rex, okay? Jurassic Park. But the dinosaur was too efficient, but were not resilient. Once there was some cooling of the environment, they were cold-blooded, they could not survive. Mammals were less efficient, but more resilient. So let's look at my own field, computer science. We do algorithm. I'm sure people have an algorithm. There is a branch of computer science that is called the analysis of algorithm. So there is a very famous book, The Art of Computer Programming by Don Knuth. Don Knuth is by now, he must be in his 80s. He's the closest we have to patron saints. He's been working on this book since 1967. So more than 50 years he's been working on these books. And you can open the books, and they're wonderful books, and they're all about efficiency. They're all about efficiency. The topic of resilience doesn't show up. So let's show one example why it's important for algorithm to be not only efficient, but also resilience. So there's an algorithm called PageRank. And PageRank was the algorithm used by Google search to rank the result of a web search. If you may remember, the internet kind of exploded in the mid-90s. You run all kind of search engine, Alta Vista, Lycos, what have you. But the result it would give you, you get lots of, junk. I mean, you'll have to scroll down page after page to find something good. And then Google came and suddenly, poof, the good results are always near the top. You rarely do a Google search and you go to the second page. It's almost always on the first page. What PageRank does, it looks at the links that relate sites to each other. And the philosophy is that if you have many links pointing to you, then you must be an important website. And if you have many important websites linked to you, then you must be very important website. And if you have many very important websites linked to you, then you're a very, very important website, and so on and so forth. And that's how Google did the analysis. But as soon as people discovered it, a whole new industry arose, search engine optimization. And it was all about, let's add fake links to fool the Google search engine. So you open a new restaurant, you want your restaurant for Japanese food to float to the top in Houston, we'll create for you many fake links to float your website to the top. In other words, PageRank was not resilient. Today, Google does not use PageRank. The patent has expired. Anybody can use PageRank. What do they use? They won't even tell you because they know that as soon as they tell you, people will start optimizing it. So today it's a trade secret. We don't know what they do. They're not willing to talk about it. I tried to get them to write about it. They say, nope, trade secret. So I want to talk about other facets of computing where I think as a discipline, this is kind of coming self-criticism, we've neglected resilience. And I want to use friction as an example. About 7 years ago, I wrote an article about friction. And I wrote, our discipline is dedicated to reducing friction. Latency must be eliminated. Bandwidth must increase. Ubiquity should be universal. Our goal is to reduce the friction of computing and communication as much as possible. Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook CEO, said, what is the goal of Facebook? Frictionless sharing. Now we know that frictionless sharing does not lead to utopia, it leads to dystopia. Now we're talking, is Facebook destroying democracy? We know of all the problem of filter bubble and fake news and extreme content. And all of them come because it is so too easy to share in Facebook. I know because I'm on Facebook and I share too much. It's just too easy. So having no friction build non-resilient systems. I'll give you another example. About 10 years ago, there was something called the flash crash. What is a flash crash? The stock market went down 600 points in 5 minutes. And they had to stop trading. Later analysis, but the SEC and the CFTC said it was caused by high frequency trading. Once it started to go down, other trading algorithms jump and jump and jump, and poof, the whole thing crashed. Now, high frequency trading is, the whole point is making it very, very fast. What's the argument for it? They said, oh, it makes the market more liquid. But even people who was involved in inventing the idea said this is all about making money. It has no social value. It's not clear why the SEC does not establish lower bounds on speed, because we know that systems that have no friction are not stable. And I'll come back to this point. Let me take another example from a completely different area. Tinder. So Tinder, it's a dating app. I never used it, but I'm told you swipe right if you like, you swipe left if you don't like. And in 2018, Jenna Birch wrote an article asking, why is it so hard to turn a Tinder date into a relationship? And she said, I've been on lots of dates, but no relationship comes out of it. And this has actually been verified by studies who say that if you meet online, you're less likely to form a steady relationship. And the answer is it's not very difficult. When two Tinder parties meet, they know that their investment has been very minimal. So it's an old song, easy come, easy goes. If it doesn't work out, oh, well, what's the big deal? I'll do another swipe. So having zero friction, it means zero effort, means people are not feeling invested in it. So it's not good to have zero friction. You want people to be invested in the relationship. So imagine that I go to my chemical engineering college, mechanical engineering colleagues, and I said, I have an idea for you. Let's eliminate all frictions in mechanical systems. They will say, you're crazy. We need friction. Your car will not drive on the highway if there's no friction between the tire and the asphalt. In fact, the tire is designed for high friction. And if the tire is old, the friction is too low, you have to replace your tire. So for the world to function, friction is a central concept. It has to be at the right amount, in the right place, in the right time. It's a nuanced picture. It's not, we need friction, we don't need friction. It depends how much and where and when. And computer science does not have this sensibility. We just say, let's get rid of friction, instead of asking, where should we put friction and to what degree and when? And so I think we need to think back. We want to build a resilient computing system, bring friction back. Let me talk about cybersecurity. I'm sure many of the people that involved in risk are thinking about cybersecurity. This is an actual quote from an email that I received from a colleague of mine who is a well-known security researcher. And he explained to me, I wrote something about security and he said, you got it all wrong. And he explained to me, here's how security works. So it's very, you see, this is the language, it's not from an essay, it's from an email. First, somebody builds a thing and it's super useful. Then eventually someone else comes along and finds a vulnerability. Then security becomes part of the engineering process. Just like we need to make sure our code does not have bugs that make it crash, we also need to make sure that our code does not have bugs that can be exploited for bad purposes. Turn the crank for enough years and eventually security gets better. So it's very clear that his philosophy, what he thinks that's a philosophy in security, security is an add-on. First you build functionality and features. Then later you go and you add security. And in fact, you may remember that in March, suddenly Zoom became popular. And then they had to add security because there was no security at the beginning. And people have been Zoom bombed, realized there's no security. So at the beginning when I started using Zoom, I just had a Zoom office and anybody could come in. And now we don't do that anymore. Now every meeting we have to go and create a one-time password and on to create security. But this lack of security is really endemic to computing. So the highest award in computing is called the ACM Turing Award. It's called the Nobel Prize in Computing. Where now the computing age is about 75 years old, okay? Going back to mid-40s. And 3 Turing Awards have been given in cryptography, which is a part of security, but it's only a small part. You can ask people, why was there no Turing Award in cybersecurity? The answer is, people tell me, who has done something that would be worthy of a Turing Award in cybersecurity other than cryptography? None. So we still do not know how to build secure systems. We hear every week, we read in the news about another company that has been breached. And now the issue is not just some leaks, some privacy. You know, I think there are our power grid is vulnerable to attack. Our financial system is vulnerable to attack. The weird thing about such attacks, it's not even clear that they are acts of war. And somebody sent a bomber to bomb Manhattan, that's an act of war. But if you mount a cyber attack on Wall Street, it's not clear. It's not even clear. The international does not say that it's an act of war. And you think that people will say, wow, this is a crisis, we must do something urgently. No, people get up, eat a breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner, go to bed. Nobody has a sense of crisis. And there is a philosophy of the computing field that I think partly is responsible for that. So I want to compare it to what happened with automobiles. You know, Ford Model T, 1908, the Ford Model T rolls off the manufacturing line. For 100 years, we've been driving cars and people get killed. We know that. So we have been now trying for 100 years to make cars safer. And we actually have been very good at it. We've reduced mortality per billion, they call it billion VMT, vehicles mile travel. We've been reducing mortality almost continuously since 1908. We decided this is so important. There's a National Transportation Safety Board. There's no National Cybersecurity Board. Even you ask people in the federal government, who is responsible for cybersecurity? They says, well, NSA, NIST. I mean, it's not, it just distributed. There's no one oversight. It's not the case that whenever every breach is analyzed and new rules are being issued, it's just not the culture. And part is, but the culture in the computing field is against regulation. They will tell you that regulation stifles innovation. Don't regulate us. But I think that cybersecurity without regulation, I don't see how it gets better. I just don't see how it gets better. I mean, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different result. Without some government action, cybersecurity will not get better. Now, I criticize my field. Let me now go criticize, after I've shown that I'm willing to self-criticize, let me go criticize economists and business community. So what is economic efficiency? So we know that because we have tried to be so efficient, we have underinvested in resilience. And in fact, you look, for example, at the CDC. In February of this year, there was a huge cut to the CDC budget. And Trump was challenged. He says, well, all these doctors are doing nothing. If we have a crisis, then we go and we hire these doctors. We hire them when we need them. But of course, when you need them, it's too late to go and try to hire them and find them and hire them. So you have to be ready for what? You can't just focus on efficiency. We have seen what happened when you just focus on efficiency. So I went to Investopedia. There is Wikipedia, there is Investopedia. And here's the definition from Investopedia of economic efficiency. It means that good and factor of productions are distributed or allocated to their most valuable use and waste is minimized. Like from that point of view, a warehouse with parts, it's a waste. Let's minimize it. Furthermore, there is an argument that the free market advocates argue that through individual self-interest and freedom of production as well as consumption, economic efficiency is achieved and the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. So the free market advocates will tell you the best way to achieve efficiency is get the government out of the equations, let just the free markets do it, we'll get efficient economy, and the best interest of society will be fulfilled. And I want to challenge it. Does efficiency really guarantee optimality? So you have to go and do a little bit economic theory. There's something called the first welfare theorem. This is the most fundamental theorem in macroeconomics. And what does it say? It says that if you have a market and it is free, that means people are free to trade, free to raise prices, free to lower prices, free to manufacture, freedom of consumption, production, and trade, then the market will end up in a competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium. Pareto optimal means no one can improve their situation without somebody else losing. So this is the argument. This is the fundamental, the same. Free markets produce economic efficiency. But really, all it says is that this is an equilibrium. Does it really serve the best interests of society? And interestingly, this question was not asked by economists, by computer scientists. The same Papadimitriou. So Papadimitriou is a person who takes, he called computational lens on other fields. So he asked, we know it isn't an equilibrium. Let's for simplicity say Nash equilibrium. He said, let's look at the ratio between the worst possible Nash equilibrium and the social optimum. And this has been called the price of anarchy, because without some government intervention, we could end up in equilibrium, but we don't know which equilibrium. It could be any equilibrium. And what he and Kutopia showed is you can end up in the price of anarchy can be arbitrarily high. So the fact that you are ending up in an equilibrium, and therefore it is efficient, said nothing about optimality. It does not guarantee at all that the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. Okay, so this is a very important point. Efficiency does not guarantee optimality. But then Papadimitriou with other people went on and asked another question. So the way you reach equilibrium in free market, there's no magic. Every actor and trader, agent, has to make some action. I see there is demand, so I'll raise the price. I see that there is demand, I will produce more. It's a sequence of what we call local actions. It's a local search for an equilibrium. Everybody try to improve until you end up in equilibrium. And they says, okay, we know that then we'll get to equilibrium, but how long will it get? And what they show is it can get a very, very, very long time. In a complex system, it can take exceedingly long time. But in exceedingly long time, the circumstances are bound to change. You know, there will be a drought, there will be a fire, all kind of things will happen. Supply will go down or up, prices will change, demand will change, fashion will change. So it turns out that this equilibrium produced by free market that produce supposedly optimal behavior is a mythical character. There's no equilibrium and there's really no efficiency. The free market does not really produce equilibrium because the world keeps changing. And therefore, it is never really efficient, and for sure, it is not optimal. So there are a lot of advantages to free market. I'm not trying to say the free market is bad, but we need to understand that part of the mythology has been sold to us free market is mythology and not real hard theory. We can go back more than almost 40 years ago. There was a movie, Wall Street, famous movie. Michael Douglas is playing Gordon Gekko, who gives a fiery speech, a very famous speech, greed is good. He said, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. And why is it good? And it's basically Adam Smith's invisible hand. Everybody is greedy, And out of this, we will get back some optimal result. But actually, every computer science student knows that this is not the case. We talked about greedy algorithms. They just try to improve, and they get stuck in what we call local optima. It's an optima in the sense that nobody can improve by a local action, but it's very far from the real optimum. You get stuck. And the only way you get unstuck is by some systemic intervention. So I think in terms of cybersecurity, we are now stuck in a local optimum. The market does not reward investment in security. It rewards investment in functionality and features. So we can call it a market failure, and we should discuss what should we do? What's the systemic intervention that is needed? And it could be, for example, maybe we need to change liability laws to make companies more liable for damages in case of security breaches. But in my opinion, without some systemic intervention, our situation in cybersecurity will not improve. Interestingly, part of this push for efficiency came from a very famous article by Milton Friedman, a Nobel Prize winning economist, in 1970, and in which he argued that the social responsibility of corporation is to make profits. And the New York Times just had a special issue on this topic. And the headline, which I put here, is from the New York Times: "Greed is good, except when it is bad." And they quoted, for example, it's really worth going and reading the articles. He quoted Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, who wrote, "I did not agree with Friedman then, and the decades since have only exposed his myopia. Just look where the obsession with maximizing profit for shareholders has brought us: terrible economic, racial, and health inequality, the catastrophe of climate change. It's no wonder that so many young people now believe that capitalism cannot deliver the equal, inclusive, sustainable future they want." And just as a small example of where this pursuit of efficiency has brought us, an article, very recent article in a Time magazine, and the title is "The Top 1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. And they went to 1975, in which the bottom 90% made 67% of all taxable income. The next 9% made 25%, and the top 1% made 9%. So the top 1% did well. They did 9% of the whole income. By 2018, the bottom 90% have lost ground to 50%. The next 9% have 28%, small change, but the top 1% went from 9% to 22%. When you accumulate, when you look at this transfer of income from 1975 to 2018, that's how they come to the conclusion. The top 1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. If you want to understand our politics, these charts will explain to you our politics. And I couldn't resist putting this one. I have a joke about trickle-down economics, but 99% of you will never get it.
Yeah.
Now, very classical economic talk about something called Homo economicus, which is that humans are rational, self-interested. They're just trying to be efficient and maximize their utility. Now, there have been a lot of studies in economics documenting the irrationality of humans. But I think even more important, already in 1956, Herb Simon was a Nobel Prize winning economist, argued for a concept called satisficing. He said, figure out what's good enough and settle for good enough. You don't have to do the optimum. And one of the things is, of course, it is less efficient because you're not getting the optimum result, but it's less resilient. It's more resilient because you're not trying to squeeze every efficiency out of the market. Now, let's go back to COVID-19. We see many systems, almost any system around us did not work. Hospital, toilet paper, what have you. But one thing did work, amazingly. The internet did work. I'm giving this talk now working from home. I have not gone shopping in 6 months. I do all my undergraduate teaching from home. All my students are at home taking my class. The internet held up. Amazing. Think about it. Everybody suddenly jumped on Zoom, and Zoom held up. What was the key principle that let that happen? And my argument, it is redundancy. So in computing, if you want to build resilience, we use redundancy. We did it. It goes back to the 1940s. If you know a little bit about communication, error correcting code, you want to make sure there's no mistake, add more bits to your transmission, okay? The body, how does the body handle there is some, disease, injury, redundancy, There was a famous case, this person that has an iron rod blown into his head. And he not only lived through it, but he kind of functioned. He has some damages, he has some dysfunctionality, but the brain has amazing optimality, amazing plasticity that enables it to repurpose redundant part, and you can function after significant damage to your brain. We understand in other areas, for example, banks now are not efficient. They're not efficient because the Feds demand that they have capital reserve to protect them from a crisis. That's not efficient. That's resilience. That's how we build resilience. I want to go back and it's interesting to look at the internet. So I want to go back and read to you because this goes back to the 1960s. Paul Baran was a not very well-known pioneer who invented some underlying technology of the internet. And the idea was to have distributed communication network. And here is a recent paper that gives the history of this. It says Baran's motivation for creating his revolutionary approach to communication networking was driven by the dominant issue of the 1960s, the Cold War, and the overhanging threat of nuclear annihilation. America's nuclear capability depended on maintaining what the strategic defense community called minimum essential communication, which was the amount of connectivity needed for the US to credibly maintain the threat of mutual assured destruction, which most observers believe was essential to deterring the Soviet Union from attempting a preemptive attack. The worry was that the Soviet Union will mount an attack to destroy the communication infrastructure of the United States, because then they know that there is no way that the US can mount a counterattack. So you had to have a resilient communication system to mount a counterattack. And if you have the capacity to mount a counterattack, then you are going to deter the Soviet Union from trying with a preemptive strike. So if you've seen Dr. Strangelove, this crazy idea of mutual assured destruction that somehow did save us from nuclear war at the end, because of this mutual assured destruction that today I can give this talk on Zoom. It's an amazing turn of events from mutual destruction to we can survive a virus. So I want to summarize, resilience is a fundamental but underappreciated societal need. I talked about computing, I talked about economics. I think other fields can ask the same question, efficiency versus resilience. What we do know is that people and markets are very bad at doing two things, very low odds and very slow odds. For example, everybody has car insurance. Imagine we made it optional. Buy car insurance if you want. Many people will say, no, I'm a careful driver. I don't need car insurance. I have enough money in the bank. I don't need car insurance. The state say, no, you must have car insurance. You want to renew your registration? Show us your car insurance. Part of our problem with climate change, and that's what I want to talk in the last couple of minutes, is it's very slow. So we are like the frog in the hot water. Because it's very slow, there's never a moment we must recognize it. There's never such a moment. And many people are saying that COVID-19 is a small crisis compared to what is potentially the bigger one, which is climate change. And we all have been watching with horror the fires on the West Coast. And if you thought, well, maybe it's not new, it is. The intensity has been growing now. You can go and look at acreage burnt. And you can see that it's increasing, not every year, it fluctuates. But we can expect these fires to continue year after year after year. And this is this is changing. I mean, California, that used to be the promised land, and now looks like the place people want to escape from. And if you want to really be scared, I recommend reading this book. It's from 2014, I think. It's a view from the future. It's a fake history. It's a history, I think, from the 24th century of how Western civilization collapsed because of climate change. So it's a scenario. I mean, you only take it half seriously, but boy, you read it and it is scary. And I want to finish with a few shout outs to relevant points. So my colleague at Rice is an economist. And in 2001, he pointed to that there is a trade-off for us that each country has somehow to figure out. Many countries as well, you know, we care about economic growth. Other countries should care about climate change. But if we all care about economic growth and then nobody cares about climate change, the only way to achieve progress in dealing with climate change is if we all act somehow collectively. And this is right now we are seeing, in fact, international institutions are declining. This idea is that we can somehow ignore international institutions means that we are not going to be able to deal with climate change. And that's a huge risk for us. A book just came out by Lee Winsel and Andrew Russell, and it's called The Innovation Delusion. And they argue that we put too much focus on innovation and not enough focus on maintenance. And I think this has to do with the issue of, again, innovation is about pursuing profits, it's about efficiency, and maintenance is about resilience. And they wrote, America has been seduced by the false charm of innovation, causing us to chase novelty and pursue disruption while neglecting maintenance in infrastructure in both the public and private sectors. So again, he said, we got too crazy, too enamored with innovation, and we have neglected maintenance. And I'll close with a book from the 1980s. It was called The Risk Society. It was written by a German sociologist. And the point that he made there was that we live in a very risk society, he called it. There are all kinds of risks that we are ignoring. Climate change is one. He was worried about nuclear energy. And in fact, Chernobyl happened 2 years later. So Adam Tooze wrote an article in Foreign Policy in which he said, the question severely exposed by the crisis such as Chernobyl and the ongoing coronavirus pandemic is how to navigate this world. And I propose that the new buzzword du jour should be resilience, resilience, resilience. Thank you very much.
Very true, Professor Vardi. Excellent presentation, and I really like your analysis. You gave really good examples, many case studies, and the broader thinking that you showed of, the benefits as well as, the risk on how we are approaching all these, our systems, our problems. Very good presentation. So thank you so much for that. And maybe we can stop the presentation now, sharing, so we can go on with the discussion. Great, perfect. So I really like your analysis. So from what you are saying to me, what it seems is that because we move towards efficiency and we ignored the resilience, we ignored understanding risk, we ignored understanding how to build resilience into what we do, the systems at the system level or the species level. That is what is missing. We do not see the approach in any country from any innovator or any policymaker or any system builder, irrespective of whether it is, systems in cyberspace or we are seeing systems in geospace, aquaspace or space. We do not see that systems thinking or even a species thinking. And because of that, we are facing many, many problems. Now, system thinking allows us to identify the key drivers or interactions and dynamics of these different variables in the human ecosystem, like scientific and economic and social and environmental, that policymakers need to, evaluate and understand before they, take decisions on how to create the intervention strategies or how to create adaptive, society, adaptive systems. So we do not see that because we have, as a society, we have failed in understanding what are the different variables that we need to look at, what are the interconnectedness, where are we connecting to, different systems, different, uh, industries and different nations. We are not seeing that. As a result, we have seen the shocks of COVID-19 and how every country pretty much, failed in their shock test, in the stress test. But the one example you were talking about the nuclear industry, and that made me think that if we take an example of this nuclear power industry, especially in how these organization for economic cooperation and development, the OECD countries, how they approach safety, they have a really very good philosophy because they believe in the integrated defense in depth. And the approach they have taken is, into looking into all different variables in how the reactor design and hardware performance and software performance and human and organizational elements, each of these variables, how it interconnects. And they have focused on integrative economics, which I'm really glad that you were talking a lot about the economics and the economic system. Because if we want to build this resilient system, we do need to understand all these integrative economics and overall system resilience, while recognizing that we have to consider a variety of complex interconnected variables. We have to understand much more than what industry we are part of or what country we are part of. So it's not just the education industry or energy industry or IT industry or computing or the government. We need to understand all different industries, all different systems, and we have to keep everything at a species level, not even the system level, but species level. Because you gave really good examples about California and the wildfires and everybody trying to escape. So if we do not keep the species thinking or the system thinking, then we are never going to be able to not only stop the current pandemic, but even prevent the future pandemic. So do you think that this would be a good place to start about, thinking as a system or thinking as a species for our collective path forward?
So, I think, look, I completely agree with you. I mean, the first, we have to think about survival. This is first. We have to see, okay, what are the, in fact, it turns out that this pandemic, if I heard an interview with Nissim Taleb, and someone tried to refer to COVID-19 as Black Swan. He said, no, Black Swan is an unforeseen event that happened. I mean, Black Swan, you really cannot, the idea is that thing happen, you just cannot plan for something, the unknown kind of thing. But the only way you plan for Black Swan is by dealing with generic resilience, like redundancy. Let's just build generic resilience. The body builds, we have extra cell for everything, for all kind of unforeseen injuries. But it turns out that the pandemic, there are videos of Bill Gates giving TED Talk from 2015. He said, the things that I'm worried about is pandemic, because we already had a few. We are lucky and none of them exploded, but he said another one is coming. Nissim Taleb himself thought about possible, when he wrote about anti-fragility, he wrote about possible pandemic. He said, this was a foreseen crisis, but there could be unforeseen crisis. Climate change is a foreseen crisis, for God's sake, right? It's much more difficult to plan for unforeseen crisis, okay? It's just to say, think about it, for example, why do we like sweet things? Because they have calories. Because basically, you never know how to predict when your food will come. So you had to be ready for having no food, so you might as well accumulate calories. Well, today it doesn't serve us well, accumulating calories, but accumulating calories was a way to survive, was a way to build resilience, okay? Very, very thin people did not survive. Now we know that obese people also have a problem, but obesity is a very new thing. So we have to really ask ourselves, what are the systemic risks that society is facing, and how do we deal with them? That's on one level. And then we have to have the serious conversation about the unknown unknowns. And to say, how do we build a society that's resilient to the unknown unknowns, okay? And that's much, much harder. That's much, much harder because, well, we don't know what kind of, how do we get ready for something like this?
Yes.
But for example, we know that it's a standard financial advice that you should have 6 months of living expenses in the bank, just if something happens. Well, 2/3 of the population cannot save $1,000. So we know that minimum what you need to have to basically to have a more resilient society, people need to have some money in the bank. So we could try to think of some kind of a program. The goal is not, we are talking about people saving for retirement. We have all this program, 401k, 403b, Roth, IRA, all these things to save for retirement. What about saving for the purpose of resilience? There's no program. And therefore, most people, we saw that 2/3 of the people in this country do not have $1,000 to spare. So we have practiced anti-resilience in this country, essentially, living on the edge.
Yes. No, I hear your point, and you gave a really good example about our human body having, these cells to make sure that our body, when it's necessary, it can use those cells and heals itself, from whatever challenges that are going on in the body. And that makes me think, at the moment, I'm also writing a book on this pandemic, and I have finished half of few chapters, and what I have uncovered in that is mind-boggling, because this human particle ecosystem that we all are living in, there are trillions and trillions of particles. And what are these particles? Just few proteins and, RNA strand or, small DNA that cannot even survive on its own. It's a particle we can't even see. So your point of unknown unknowns, these are the unknown unknowns that we do not understand. And there is a lot of fear because of this pandemic. And I have evaluated all these past pandemics that human species has gone through over the years. And every time the pandemic has happened, there was something that had shifted in the human ecosystem. Either the war was going on, or some other scenarios were there, and because of that, it was not just the human's internal metabolism that shifted, but there were a lot of other things that shifted in the environment. And that made me start thinking, that what shifted at the moment? Why did this virus decided to jump? Even if let's say it came from bat or any other place, why did it decide to jump and inhabiting the humans? What was the need? Is it possible that the nature, the ecosystem, is trying to build resilience in humans because there is something has shifted in our environment? So I think there is something, going on in our nature, in our ecosystem that we don't understand. Perhaps nature has built in, resilience mechanisms by which, whenever that code is necessary for humans to evolve, it, creates this situation where, we feel that it's a pandemic, but it is possible that nature thinks that this is a time that this particular code, this particular strand of RNA, this particular genomic code is necessary. This particular two proteins are necessary for this genomic code from this, particle that humans need to integrate with. Because if you look at our human genome, more than half of it is made of viruses. So is it possible that, there is something that has shifted in our human ecosystem? So the nature decided that we needed that particular segment of the virus for its genomic code so that we become resilient and we can evolve further, because all this evolution, human evolution, has mostly happened like that. So it is very interesting. I'm still trying to understand. I have scheduled a risk roundup discussion with a scientist from CERN, because there is something, that we need to understand about the particles, the particle ecosystem, and how it creates a vacuum and how the changes happen. So it's a topic of discussion for some another day when, I have finished my analysis. But if we look at this pandemic, there are two contagions, the virus itself and the fear. And they both operate in tandem. And it impacts the behavior of not only consumers, the common man, individuals, but also the behavior of corporations, businesses. So the movement that we saw in the capital markets because of this pandemic, it had nothing to do that they were all impacted that significantly, so we would see this kind of movement. It had nothing to do that there was a necessity for that movement, but that fear that triggered the movement, and everybody started taking decisions because of that fear, and this led to crash of unprecedented proportion. We saw that so many supply chains they collapse. So since the ability to react to changing demand is crucial, what is your take on the supply chain collapse that we witnessed, especially when we needed an ability to react to such changing demand, and we failed, I think, in all criterias?
So I think part of this issue of efficiency versus trading, you have to understand, part of like trading, you have Ricardo. Trading is all about efficiency. Trading is about efficiency. The whole idea of to one country is better doing this, one country is better doing that. So it's more efficient to let each country do their best. So this is kind of very classical economics, okay? But it ignores, it's all about efficiency. It completely ignored the dimension of resilience. So I think I'm hoping that we are going to see, a lot of economists are saying, well, let's rethink. Let's start to think about the trade-off of efficiency versus resilience. And I think we are going to see a lot of retrenchment of globalization. For example, if, all people would say Mexico, for example, come to the US and says, you guys are crazy of buying this from China. China, first of all, it's very far away. It's also a global competitor. We are just next to you. Let's go into business together, okay? You want low labor costs? Just come to Mexico. You don't have to go to China. We're not as good as China, but we are closer. We are more friendly than China. I think we are going to see lots of, the idea, when this whole thing started, I couldn't buy hand sanitizers. I remember in March, I was trying to buy hand sanitizer. And eventually, where I ordered hand sanitizers from? From China. That's the only way to get hand sanitizers. So I think there will a lot of rethinking will go into, yes, we're not going to give up on efficiency completely, but how to find the right balance between efficiency and resilience. And that means that you're going to think what, maybe certain parts, that are not crucial, certain products, I don't know, maybe cosmetic we decide is less important, let's make cosmetic in China. But things that is more important, like hospital equipment, for hospital to rely on China for PPEs, was kind of insane.
Yes, I agree with you. It is insane. We made China a manufacturing hub, and we all the countries depended on that. So when there is a pandemic there, and when their systems collapse, everybody is screwed. So you are absolutely right that is a mistake, and that was a mistake, and we will have to reevaluate how we move forward, because we always jump into action. We meaning every country's decision makers, we jump into action after a disaster happens, and that is not a really good substitute for being prepared, especially for a country like United States. So if you look at, irrespective of pandemics or wildfires or natural disaster to human-made disaster, we can rely on technology to give us some sort of early alert system, but we have not developed any of these alert systems. So for pandemic especially, yes, we have alert systems built in for tornadoes, and we have alert system for earthquakes and many natural disasters. That is a great progress, but we have not focused on wildfires or pandemics, because in our society nothing works without incentives. So do you think we have the right incentives for technology development, especially When the market will not do it, for instance, in developing technology to these disease outbreaks or developing vaccines or developing alert system for wildfires.
Look, I mean, if you look at it, for example, look at, again, I think car safety is a very, very good example. Why did car become safer and safer and safer? Not because of the free market. Not because of the free market. Basically, because of government regulation. And it turns out that if you do regulation the right way, then I remember when I was involved in some studies 15 years ago. And I remember talking from people from industry, and they wanted a better healthcare system. And they said, we want the government involved because then all of us are on equal footing. So right now, if I make my car safer and you don't, then I spend more money on safety. It's not clear how I turn it into better sales. Only one company really has been able to take safety with huge investment and make it into a feature, and that's Volvo. People buy Volvo because it is safe. But no other company advertises for safety. They all advertise for features. When it comes to safety, they have to make government regulation. And they like it to be this way because then nobody can defect. Nobody can say, I will invest less. So the worry is, we'll invest in safety. They will not. And then our car is more expensive than theirs, but go convince the consumer that it's worth the money. And so they said, if you establish uniform regulations and you made sure that this is applied when it comes to cars, it doesn't only apply to US cars. But if Japan wants to sell cars in the United States, they have to meet the same regulation. So we are all on equal footing. So in this case, in fact, government regulation, in this case, stimulated innovation. We have increased MPG. The cars are much more efficient because the government had a requirement. You must meet a certain MPG requirement. So regulation is very, very tricky. Regulation is hard. Doing regulation well is hard. Okay, you have to do it. There are all kinds of people who will tell you about all the problem with regulation. It's not a panacea. But I would say many things in life is hard. Education is hard. So we struggle. We try to do the best we can. We learn from our mistake. We keep doing it. So the question is how to do regulation in a way that creates innovation and doesn't stifle innovation. Okay, but even innovation by itself is not a goal. It's means to an end. Facebook was innovation. Was it a good innovation? Well, people are debating it. People are saying, wouldn't be better off if we didn't have Facebook at all, okay? And so they made tons of money, but is it good for society? And certain things we decided, we don't want them. We decided, for example, that donating kidneys, we do not want people sending kidney for money. Why? We decided that the society, because it will take advantage of poor people. So we say it is morally wrong to do that. Let's not do that. Now, so they have a whole other system. They have an alternative market system for donating organ. Have to do, if I donate to you, I get credit, and you donate to someone else. Create alternative market. It's not based on money. It's based on people doing the right thing. So we have to figure it out. There are no easy answers how to do that. We will make mistakes. We will send some regulation. We will say, no, this did not work out. Let's try something else. The Constitution starts, in my opinion, with one amazing sentence. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, not a perfect union, a more perfect union. And we can look now at our union and we see it's very far from perfect. But it's an internal quest to form a more perfect union. Yes. And that's how we need to look at, we should need to go back and say, we made a mistake. We put too much focus on efficiency. Let's rethink it. I mean, what we really need for economies to start thinking about resilience. They have not done it.
Yes, absolutely.
It should be built into microeconomics. This trade-off between efficient and resilience should be built in. And we need lots of people thinking hard. How does society find the right? Because it's a delicate balance.
Yes, it
okay.
is.
It's a delicate balance.
Absolutely. You gave a really good example, and I agree with you on the regulation part, but see, the regulations for certain problems, every country has to come together and they all need to be unified in
Absolutely.
in drafting those regulations now, and in creating also institutions and organizations that can do a better job as one institution who has a sole voice in solving the problems. For instance, World Health Organizations. Now, we are not living in a linear world where actions cause predictable reactions. We all understand that, and we are in fact part of a complex system that we are constantly trying to reconfigure, and that is impacting all of us, individually and collectively. So we all are quite aware of the challenges, but as we go through COVID-19, the question that comes to mind is that yes, all the countries came together, we built institutions and organizations like CDC and World Health Organization, but how did we not identify the trigger points of pandemic? Who was responsible, and why did they fail, and how did they fail? At what level the challenges happened? So was it in China that we faced the problem, or was it at the global level, the World Health Organization, or was it CDC? Where did we face the problem?
So, hospital have something called, I think I got it right, Mortality and Morbidity Committee. And after every death in a hospital, this committee sits together and analyze what happened. And the proceedings are confidential because they want people to be able to say, I made a mistake. They want a surgeon to say, I made a mistake, and because of my mistake, someone died. And if it's not confidential, then immediately, oh, you made a mistake. We should sue you for like you're liable. We should sue you. So everybody would clam up. So the idea, it's a little bit like what South Africa did. What did they call it? The Reconciliation Committee. Try to say, let's establish where we come clean without people putting themselves at risk. Let's give people incentive to be truthful. So we do an analysis to figure out what went wrong, and we do what we call postmortem. We go and we learn what mistake did we do, and what do we learn from this mistake. We have a board member at Rice who used to be a professional football player. And I asked him once, what happens in a dressing room after a game that you won? He said, 5% compliments. You did well, this and this was good. Congratulations on your victory. But you made so many mistakes. You're just very lucky that your opponents missed these mistakes. Let's go over your mistake, because next time you will not be so lucky. So what we need is just to be self-critical and honest about it, and create the societal system that enables us to do. We should have, right, for example, why do people object to Trump calling it the Wuhan virus? The virus did emerge in Wuhan, okay? But of course, he didn't say it because he wanted to be geographically accurate. He was laying blame. If you're going to start blaming China, then China is not going to come honest and say, here is what happened. If you come and say, whatever happened, happened. Let's have a meeting of scientists, not politicians. We're going to come up with lessons learned from COVID-19. Bring the top epidemiologists and virologists from the world it's too early now, but bring them back, in a year when this is, and say, what do we learn from this? What mistake? Every country made mistakes, okay? I follow, my family is in Israel. Israel handled the first round extremely well. And then they thought, oh, we were good. Now we deserve a cookie. Now we can go to restaurants because we're good. The virus doesn't care whether you're good or not. The virus keep looking for bodies. So now Israel is in a second wave because they thought we were good. So no country, very, very few countries handle it well. And we really need to sit after that and says, okay, lots of failures. What worked well? Let's not lay blame. This cannot be done by politicians. Scientists need to get together and says, what did we learn from this? How do we get the WHO ready for the next time? How do we get this? The CDC screwed up, we know that. How do we get the CDC ready for next time? What do we do as a society to get ready for next time?
Yes, that is the right approach.
This is, I was in the military. And this is how the military does it. After every operation, they says, okay, exactly what happened. The assumption is everybody makes mistakes. But we need to be honest about the mistakes. to learn from them. As soon as people say, oh, if I'm honest about my mistakes, then I will pay the price for it, everybody climbs up.
Yes.
So the answer is this: just you have to create a culture where people don't take risk by admitting their mistakes. Where instead of saying, oh, you made a mistake, you get demoted, you say, you talk about your mistakes, you get promoted. It's the opposite. We need a culture of improvement.
Yes, provide better incentives, right? Instead of punishment. You are right. So I agree with you on that. Now, viruses, we know that it doesn't respect borders or any kind of silos that humans have created. And as a result, whatever response we all come up with has to be global and has to be intersectoral, right? So do you think that as we see all these countries are trying to go inwards and be more nationalist, I understand, we bring the manufacturing back, and, I understand all those near-shoring solutions that would emerge that could help countries like ours. But is it possible that we will be able to generate this global coordination and integrated model that can apply to any and all systems where countries can motivate and justify an integrated multilateral approach to helping national and international systems so that they can recover better, for, any other coming, challenges? What are your recommendations?
So I think we got confused, and we thought that globalization meant globalization of supply chain, global supply chain. And global supply chain, you have to globalize some places, but not others, okay? Because in global supply chain, in global trading, we have to balance efficiency versus resilience. But globalization also should mean building global institutions, true global institutions, because we won't be able to deal with climate change unless we build global institutions and we all work together on it. We had one success story about climate, and that's the ozone hole. So we discovered that certain chemical destroys the ozone hole, and if you destroy the ozone hole, you get more ultraviolet radiation, and that poses a tremendous risk to everyone. And amazingly, humanity was able to do the right thing and do an international treaty and obey it and follow up on it. And we have been able to reduce the size of the ozone hole. This is a huge success story. This is what we should try to do more. So, the problem with all of this situation is that, if you come up with the philosophy, America first, then there's going to be no collaboration, no cooperation. Of course, everybody understands that you're going to care about your interests, but you also have to understand that your interests depend on humanity as a whole working together to reduce the threat of climate change. So it's in yourself. You want America to be first, you have to deal with climate change. You can't deal with climate change unless you work with China on this one. So it's in your selfish interest to collaborate, okay? It's like, you have to have you need to do some, all kind of exercise, in corporate retreat, they do sometimes this kind of thing that you have to build a bridge and people must work together to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And unless they can do it together, in fact, I teach a course now, and the students have to work in teams. And I tell them, you get 1 grade for the 2 people. If you work well together, everybody gets a better grade. If you don't work well together, doesn't matter you did well. If the other person did not do well, you get the same grade for the team. It's 1 grade for the team. So we get 1 grade at the end of the day with climate change. We all have the same grade in humanity. Is the Earth, what happened here to Earth, okay? It's going to be different problems. It's fires in California and tropical storm and hurricanes here in Houston and other threats somewhere else. But overall, unless we find a way to work together, we all suffer.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is one of the lessons you have to teach. Everybody has children, has to teach the 2 children. If you have more than 1 child, I have only one son. But if you have more than 1, work together. It's better for both of you to work together.
Yes.
And being like a me, and you lose. You personally lose if you have this attitude, me.
Yes, very true. We need to have a civilization thinking instead of our tribal thinking that we are witnessing all across nations at the moment. So you're absolutely right. That is an excellent analysis, an excellent presentation, and very good information. I'm sure our global viewers and listeners are going to benefit tremendously from what you shared today. So thank you so much, Professor Vardi, for participating in this roundup today. We
My pleasure.
appreciate we appreciate your thoughtful insight on lessons from COVID-19 and need to build resilient systems. And our global viewers and listeners, as I just said, that they are going to benefit tremendously, and they would hopefully get an incentive to work together and create, systems that can solve the problem for the coming tomorrow. So as a result, this kind of dialogue has been of service, and we thank you for that. So
Namaste.
Namaste. Risk Group is a strategic security risk research platform and community. Through the Risk Roundup initiative, Risk Group and I are on a mission to talk with a billion people, innovators, scientists, entrepreneurs, futurists, technologists, policymakers to decision makers. And the reason behind this effort through the Risk Roundup initiative is to research, review, rate, and report strategic security risk facing humanity. This collective intelligence effort is essential to understand where we need to focus for our collective security and for what destructive forces we need to be mindful about. So thank you so much for being the part of the conversation. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.